What would you do if your very own backyard was commandeered for a high society event? Today, I'm sharing how an overreaching HOA pushed me to release my herd of bison at a community barbecue, and the unforgettable chaos that followed. I remember the first time I set foot on my little piece of paradise, a sprawling 15-acre ranch nestled on the outskirts of a quiet town where the rolling hills met endless skies. For 30 years, I poured my heart and soul into every inch of that land. I built my rustic home with my own hands, nurtured a small, passionate herd of American bison, and cherished the freedom and simplicity of life away from the chaos of modern society. My prized bull, Thunder, a magnificent 2,000-pound force of nature, was not just an animal. He was a guardian of the land, a living symbol of everything I had worked so hard to create. Everything was peaceful until the day the new developments began creeping up on my property. On the edge of my ranch, a glitzy subdivision called Whispering Meadows began to take shape. At first, I barely gave it a second thought. After all, I had been here long before the cookie-cutter homes and manicured lawns appeared on the horizon. But then came the HOA, led by Margaret Wellington, a woman with an air of entitlement and a taste for perfection that bordered on obsession. Margaret, fresh from the East and decked out in the latest designer fashions, quickly made it clear that she didn't care about history or tradition. All she cared about was rules, aesthetics, and the bottom line. It all started with a few seemingly innocuous letters. First, there was a note about my split-rail fence, which she claimed didn't meet community standards. Then, more letters followed, complaints about agricultural use in a residential zone, and even a bizarre claim that my well-tended ranch was somehow a hazard to the neighborhood. I tried to explain that my land was not part of their newly minted domain, but my words seemed to vanish into thin air. The more I protested, the more determined Margaret and her cronies became. One fateful afternoon, I received what I initially thought was a clerical error, a glossy invitation to a grand summer gala to be held on my very own land. The invitation boasted an authentic ranch experience, and even advertised gourmet bison burgers, all while showing tantalizing photos of my pristine natural spring and the bison grazing in the golden light of dawn. Shock and disbelief mingled with anger. Not only was the HOA commandeering my property for their event, but they were also planning to profit off it, selling tickets at steep prices while completely disregarding my rights as the landowner. I remember feeling a mix of disbelief and simmering rage as I read the invitation. Here I was, a humble rancher who had spent decades respecting the land, and now a group of self-important neighbors were treating it like a backdrop for their social event. I made a few phone calls, contacted my lawyer, and prepared for what I knew was going to be a battle not just for my property, but for my dignity. I wasn't going to let someone else dictate how my land should be used. On the day of the event, the situation escalated quickly. Early in the morning, I noticed trucks and workers setting up on the eastern edge of my property. They were marking out tents, stages, and even a VIP section, as if my ranch were a mere park available for public use. I tried to reason with them, to remind them that this land was mine and had been my sanctuary for decades, but I was met with cold, bureaucratic responses and even threats. Margaret herself arrived in a sleek black SUV, exuding confidence and dismissiveness. She explained that the county had provisionally approved the event, a statement that made no sense when I knew, from my own records and discussions with officials, that no such ordinance existed. By mid-morning, I could see that the HOA's event was in full swing. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses milled around the setup, snapping photos and sipping champagne. They were entirely oblivious to the undercurrent of injustice that had led to this moment. I watched from the porch, my heart pounding, as the community that had once admired the simple, unspoiled beauty of my ranch now looked on with an air of entitlement. I felt betrayed not just by the HOA, but by the very idea that progress meant erasing the legacy of those who truly respected the land. It was at that moment that I knew I had reached my breaking point. I had always believed in solving conflicts with words, with legal counsel, with quiet determination. But today, when the sanctity of my home and the integrity of my hard work were being trampled by a group of self-important strangers, I realized that sometimes words aren't enough. I needed to let nature speak for itself. I had spent years designing the boundaries of my property with care and respect for the natural flow of the land. I knew every inch of it, the soft curve of a hillside, the secret path by the spring, and the way the wind carried the scent of wild sage. And so I made a decision. With a steady hand, I unlocked the gate leading to the pasture where Thunder and the rest of my bison grazed. I knew that once free, the bison would follow the path I had so meticulously planned, a path that led straight to the heart of the gala area. In the midst of the elegant chaos, as the string quartet began playing Vivaldi and caterers arranged elaborate displays of gourmet food, I stepped forward and quietly signaled to Thunder. I watched as he paused for a brief moment, as if understanding the gravity of what was about to happen, and then he took a step forward. One by one, my bison began to move, their massive forms gliding with a surprising grace across the land. The effect was almost cinematic. Guests, initially amused by what they assumed was an orchestrated ranch authenticity act, soon realized that this was no performance at all. Panic set in as the bison, drawn by the familiar scent of the barbecue and their instinctual curiosity, surged toward the setup. The once confident chatter of the crowd dissolved into a cacophony of gasps and shouts. People scattered, tripping over chairs and table settings as they fled from the unstoppable force of nature that now roamed freely on the manicured lawns of Whispering Meadows. I stood at the edge of the chaos, heart pounding not with fear but with a sense of vindication. Here were these magnificent creatures reclaiming what was rightfully mine. A poetic, if somewhat wild, response to an injustice that had been allowed to fester for far too long. Margaret's face, usually so composed and imperious, gave way to sheer panic as she tried desperately to regain control of the situation. Security guards moved in, attempting to corral the panicking guests and restore order, but it was too late. The bison, unburdened by any sense of restraint, continued their steady advance, their hooves thundering across the lawn like the heartbeat of the untamed land itself. Thunder, in particular, became the undeniable leader of the herd, his massive frame and commanding presence leaving no doubt that he was the true master of these fields. The commotion reached its peak when the sheriff arrived on the scene. His cruiser lights flickered softly, and he stepped out with a look of perplexity on his face, clearly unprepared for the surreal collision of high society and raw nature. In the ensuing moments, as the bison grazed nonchalantly and the remaining guests huddled in disbelief, it became unmistakably clear that the day belonged not to the superficial promises of a community gala, but to the indomitable spirit of a man who had fought for his right to live on his land. After the chaos subsided and the crowd dispersed, the aftermath was both a physical and symbolic reclamation of my property. I received a formal apology from the HOA board, along with compensation for the damages to my property and a promise from the county to better protect the rights of landowners like myself. More importantly, I had sent a message that progress does not have to come at the cost of tradition and the hard work of those who have dedicated their lives to preserving the natural world. Looking back on that unforgettable day, I realized that it wasn't just about a single event or a fleeting moment of rebellion. It was about standing up for the values I hold dear: the right to honor one's past, the responsibility to protect nature, and the courage to say enough is enough when faced with injustice. My bison, led by the resolute Thunder, had reminded everyone that while society might try to impose its rules and erode our connection to the land, there will always be those who are willing to fight for what truly matters. In the end, my story isn't just about a wild day at a rogue HOA barbecue. It's a reminder to all of us that sometimes, the best way to defend what we love is to let nature take its course. And as I sit here today, reflecting on that incredible day of chaos and catharsis, I know that my land, my legacy, and my beloved bison will forever be a testament to the power of standing your ground. Thank you for joining me on this wild journey. I hope you found this story as inspiring and heart-pounding as I did, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on standing up for what matters most in your life. Until next time, remember, sometimes the roar of nature is louder than any boardroom or HOA meeting ever could.